I'm not sure where to start exactly, but honestly, I think this might be too long for a forum like Reddit. However, I need to get this off my chest. I've spent almost my entire adult life sacrificing for my parents, and now, when everything should have been sorted out, they still declared me a complete failure. My name is Marco, I'm 30. I live in Berlin, working as a programmer in a small but reliable IT firm. My career has been going decently. I quickly realized the value of savings, investments, and building my own path. My girlfriend Sophia has been with me for 3 years, and I can honestly say she's the most wonderful person I've ever met, but more on her later. My parents, Antonio and Maria, have always seemed to me like extremely unstable people. In my youth, our life was quite ordinary. We had a modest apartment on the outskirts. Dad worked as a consultant, Mom in the finance department. But over time, their financial stability started to crumble. I never saw real poverty from them, but I felt something was going wrong. Mom was always complaining about bills, credit cards, some obligations, and Dad constantly brushed off conversations about finances. Back then, I thought, well, they're adults, they'll figure it out. After university, I moved to Berlin and started building my career. The early years were tough, low pay, long shifts, but I saw the potential. I wanted not just to earn for myself, I wanted to help my parents if the time came. And that time came. I found out they had accumulated a huge bank loan, about 250,000 euros, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were also credit cards, tax arrears, medical bills. They hid it from me, but the bank started sending notices, and I accidentally came across one. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my apartment, printing out a report on my investments, and suddenly, a message from the bank warning about a lawsuit. My first emotion was shock. How? Why didn't they say anything? When I asked my parents, they just brushed it off and said, "We'll handle it." But I knew that without help it was impossible. I could have just ignored it and said, "This isn't my problem," but I couldn't. I couldn't leave them in trouble. Over the next 5 years, I basically sent everything I earned to cover their debts. I worked 12, 14 hours a day, took freelance gigs at night, sold things I valued. Every time a bit of extra money came in, I transferred it to my parents' accounts. Sophia supported me, though it hurt her to watch. She kept saying, "You're giving them too much, they won't appreciate it." And I always replied, "I'm not doing it for praise, I just can't do otherwise." Gradually, the debts started to melt away. First the credit cards, then the medical expenses, finally, the bank. After 5 years of hard work, almost without rest, I made the final payment. The last digits on the online banking screen seemed to scream, freedom. I was proud of myself, truly. I thought that after this my parents would show gratitude, that they would finally say, "Marco, you saved us." But no. That evening, when I came to them to announce that all the debts were cleared, they greeted me not with joy, but with reproaches. "Well, you finally managed to do something worthwhile," said Dad. "You could have handled it faster," Mom chimed in. I stood there with burning eyes and an empty soul. 5 years of self-sacrifice, sleepless nights, stress, strict saving, and this. They called me a failure. I couldn't comprehend how this was possible. Everything I did was for them, for the family. And I was ready to give up everything, career, personal life, rest for them. And now they say I let them down. Sophia saw me on a video call when I was trying to hold back. She tried to comfort me. "Marco, this isn't about you. They just don't know how to be grateful." But how do you explain that to 5 years of life given entirely? After that, I realized that the care and support I expected from my parents was an illusion. I was their savior, but in their eyes, an eternal loser. I started to understand that, despite my devotion, their complaints and demands are endless. They will never be satisfied. And then I took the first key step for myself. I decided that I wouldn't let their toxicity ruin my life anymore. I started investing in my own projects, in my own home, in my relationship with Sophia. We moved in together, launched a joint IT project, and gradually my life became more balanced. I felt like I could be happy, even if they never acknowledged my efforts. The first months after the final payment were strange. I tried to keep in touch, invited them over, but every conversation turned into a new dose of criticism. I started responding more calmly, without getting into conflict. Sometimes I wonder, why am I still trying to earn their affection? And every time I conclude that it's pointless. Real family is those who support you, who rejoice in your achievements, not those who manipulate and belittle your efforts. Sophia became my real family. She was there when I cried at night from helplessness and pain, when I felt worthless. She reminded me that my sacrifices weren't in vain. They laid the foundation for our life, for our future. And now, looking back, I realize I didn't let them down. I only let myself down when I tried to find in them what wasn't there, genuine gratitude and respect. Today, I live my own life. I develop my career, love Sophia, and we have everything we need for happiness. I don't blame my parents for their inability to appreciate me. I just no longer allow them to control my emotions. My story is a tale of betrayal, failure, but also of personal growth. I lost 5 years of life, but gained something grand, understanding who I really am and who I want to be with. So if someone is reading this and thinks that sacrifices for family always pay off, sometimes they don't. But that doesn't mean they're useless. Sometimes they open your eyes to the true value of those around you, to those who truly care. I wrote this here because I needed to vent. Thanks for reading. After that evening, when I fully cleared all my parents' obligations, it seemed like everything should stabilize. I expected that now they would show gratitude, that they could finally relax. But reality turned out different. The next day, Mom called me, her tone icy. "You could have put in more effort." "More of what?" I barely managed to say. "Well, you still let us down," she said and hung up. I felt my chest tightening. Everything I did, every sleepless night, every extra job, every saving on myself, it all turned out insufficient. I was their savior, but in their eyes, an eternal fiasco. Sophia was nearby when I returned to the apartment. She said nothing, hugged me, and said, "You did the impossible, Marco. Don't let them break what you've built." But how do you ignore the pain when it bites so deeply into your soul? I tried to distract myself with work, but every signal from my parents was a stab in my chest. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, maybe I'm just not good enough. Sophia and I started discussing the future more often. She suggested ways to expand our small IT initiative that we launched together. It was a way not just to work, but to rebuild my self-esteem. Meanwhile, my parents started increasing the pressure. They called about checking our finances, asked when I could help them with home renovations, even after all the debts were cleared. One day, I decided to invite them over to show that our life matters too. I wanted them to see that their son is living his own life, that he's not a hostage to debt. We organized a meal. I cooked everything myself. Sophia helped. My parents came, but within an hour, the meal turned into criticism. "Why do you have such fancy chairs? Why aren't you working even longer? You could pay for our vacation trip." I looked at Sophia and she just squeezed my hand. I realized it was a sign. Either I continue to endure their toxicity or I build my own barriers. The next day, I sat down and wrote a message. I chose my words carefully because it was hard. I explained that I could no longer allow their behavior to affect my life, that my sacrifices were for them, but now I have to take care of myself. When I sent the message, my soul contracted. It was scary, after all, a leap into the unknown. But I also felt that it was the first real act of self-care. Gradually, I started noticing the results. My relationship with Sophia strengthened, the business started making profit, and I began investing in my home and education. I realized I could be happy even if my parents don't respect me. But fate sometimes throws surprises. A couple of months later, I got a signal from the bank. My name popped up in some old arrear of my parents that they forgot to mention. My soul contracted again, but now I knew what to do. I calmly contacted the bank, sorted out the details, and quickly resolved the issue without nerves and sleepless nights. Sophia watched me and said, "See, you've grown stronger. You can handle any difficulties and they won't crush you." I started to realize that care and support don't come from parents. I had constructed an image of what I should be and tried to match it, but it was endless. True care is when a person respects you for who you are, not for what you've done for them. At some point, I decided it was time to meet my parents face to face. I wanted to finally close this circle, so I wouldn't live in permanent anxiety and expectation of criticism. I invited them for coffee at a cozy place. Sitting opposite, I spoke evenly, without anger. I love you, and I'll always be around if you truly want companionship and respect. But I can't allow your demands to ruin my life anymore. They were silent. In my mother's eyes, I saw a mix of surprise and resentment. Dad just nodded. No apologies, no agreement, just silence. But I felt relief. I said my piece, set boundaries, and left. From that moment, our relationship changed. I no longer felt anxiety before every call. I started living my own life. I went on many trips with Sophia. We hung out with friends, made plans. A year after all those incidents, the business with Sophia became stable. We bought a small apartment in the heart of Berlin, started thinking about the future. And I realized the main thing: happiness doesn't come through saving others. It comes through realizing that your life is valuable in itself. Sometimes my parents call. Sometimes I hear criticism, but now it doesn't sting. I've learned to take it evenly without emotional attachment. Sophia is nearby, and her care reminds me that true support is not words, but actions and presence. This story might seem sad, but for me, it became a lesson. I lost 5 years of life trying to save my parents, but gained much more: personal independence, true care, and understanding of my own importance. If someone is reading this and feels pressure from family, remember, you don't have to sacrifice yourself for their approval. Sometimes you need to put yourself first to become stronger. Today, I live for real. I'm not the perfect son in my parents' eyes, but I'm perfect for myself and for Sophia. And that's what matters. A few months after I set boundaries in my relationship with my parents, life started to straighten out. I felt the taste of independence again, developed the business with Sophia, went on short trips, enjoyed everyday pleasures. It seemed the storm had subsided. But as often happens in life, the past doesn't let go easily. One evening, my dad called me. His tone was unusually restrained. "Marco, I need to talk," he said. I sensed unusual tension, but agreed to meet. We arranged at the same place where I set my boundaries. When I arrived, Dad was already sitting at the table. He looked exhausted, aged over these years, with clear wrinkles on his forehead. I sat opposite, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from inner vigilance. "Listen," he began, pausing. "I've been thinking a lot about you and what happened." I remained silent, not interrupting. "We judged you wrongly," he said quietly. "I realized that you gave up your years to support us, and we didn't appreciate it. I'm sorry." I felt a strange relief, but also distrust. 5 years of devotion, endless nights, and now these words. Can they make up for everything lost? "I appreciate that, Dad," I replied evenly. "But words don't change anything. I just want us to communicate without pressure and criticism." Dad nodded. He talked for a long time about his mistakes, about how hard it was for them to accept their obligations and dependence on me. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt he understood my suffering. When I returned to the apartment, Sophia greeted me with a smile. "How did it go?" she asked. I just hugged her and felt that a tiny weight had finally lifted from my soul. But the trials didn't end there. A few weeks later, Mom decided to invade my life in another way. She found a way to connect to my career through acquaintances and mutual connections in the industry. She started calling constantly, advising, criticizing my choices. It was a new level of pressure. I realized that simple forgiveness and talks weren't enough. I needed to act decisively. I sat down with Sophia again. We discussed a strategy: reduce communication with Mom, set clear boundaries, focus on our projects and personal matters. Sophia was there every step of the way, and her support became my true foundation. At the same time, the business started yielding the first solid results. We got a contract from a large company, projects expanded, and I realized I could afford dreams that I had postponed for my parents. But emotionally, I still carried scars. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that resentment toward my parents prevented me from being fully happy. Sophia helped me process these emotions. You're not to blame for their flaws. Your life is your responsibility. One evening, when we were sitting in the apartment discussing vacation plans, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt lightness. I started appreciating every moment with Sophia, realizing that true care is support, not demands and manipulations. And that's when the unexpected happened. One day, an old family friend showed up, who knew about all my sacrifices. He told me that my parents were discussing me among acquaintances, and their opinion had changed a lot. People were talking about how I managed to clear huge obligations, how I kept my sanity and honor. This gave me a strange feeling. I didn't do it for praise, but realizing that others see my strength and resilience gave an extra boost to respect myself. A few months later, Sophia and I decided to take a vacation in Italy. It was symbolic. We were leaving the past behind, creating new memories, writing our own story. Every day we wandered the streets of Rome, laughed, dreamed, and for the first time I felt free from the burden of the past. During this time, my parents tried to get in touch, but I had learned to control my boundaries. They came with requests, but I no longer gave in to manipulations. I responded evenly, sometimes even briefly, and it was amazing. The world didn't collapse, life went on. And now, 2 years after that final debt payment, I realized that life can be wonderful. I maintained relations with my parents at a level of respect, but without emotional attachment. With Sophia, I built not just a home, but a true foundation of happiness. My story isn't about parents being bad or good. It's about how important it is to realize that your life is your responsibility. That care and approval don't always come from those we consider family. That sometimes you need to build your own boundaries to find independence and true care. Sophia often says, "You've become a different person, strong, confident, independent." And I see in that confirmation that even through betrayal and failure, you can come to personal growth. I lost years sacrificing myself for my parents, but gained much more. Understanding my own importance, true care, a career, and independence. And if I could go back, I'd still do the same because it's through that I became who I am. Today, when I look at our life, our home, the business, my relationship with Sophia, I realize that the true reward isn't in my parents' approval, but in what I managed to create myself. And that's worth more than any praise. Almost 3 years have passed since the day I cleared my parents' final bill. A lot has changed in that time. I've become more confident, learned to set boundaries and control my fate. Sophia was there every step, supporting, motivating, and helping not to get lost in the mess my parents left. Our business with Sophia became stable. We started with small orders for local clients, and now we collaborated with global companies. The financial independence I once only dreamed of became a reality. I could afford to live as I wanted, without guilt or pressure. But the real test was meeting my parents a few months later. They came to our home, not with requests, but just for a meal. It was their way of trying to revive the connection. I felt anxiety, but now it was different, not fear, but cautious readiness. We sat at the table, and this time the conversation was different. They didn't criticize, didn't demand, didn't manipulate. Dad talked about the past, about his mistakes, about how he wrongly judged me. Mom was quiet, but in her eyes I saw remorse and understanding. "We haven't always been good parents," Dad said, "but we're proud of who you've become." These words don't change the past, but they were sincere. I realized that true forgiveness isn't for them, but for me. I could leave the suffering behind and move forward. After the meal, Sophia and I went for a walk through nighttime Berlin. The air was fresh, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that all the weight of years on my shoulders had evaporated. We laughed, discussed the future, dreams, and I realized the main thing. Happiness doesn't come through others' agreement. It comes through inner independence and the care of those who are close. In the following months, I started getting involved in philanthropic projects. I realized I could use my resources and skills to support those who truly deserve it, not those who only demand. It was my conscious decision to direct energy where it brings joy and impact, not into endless parental demands. Sophia and I bought a home on the outskirts, small, warm, but ours. We started traveling, building our own family, opening new horizons for ourselves. Every trip, every shared goal, every evening at home, it was all the fruit of our efforts and mutual care. I often recall the moments when I sacrificed myself for my parents. I don't regret what I did, but now I realize the most important investment is in yourself. Care and support should be mutual, and if they're not, it's time to create your own path. One day, sitting with Sophia on the balcony of our home watching the sunset, I told her, "You know, I realized that true family isn't those who gave you life, but those who choose to be close and support you." She smiled, took my hand, and said, "And we chose each other." I realized that my sacrifices weren't useless. They taught me to respect myself, build relationships, make decisions, and not fear being autonomous. I became stronger, wiser, and more independent. Now, as I write this story, I realize every step, every suffering, every moment of failure led me to this, to a life I created myself, with the person I love, and with the understanding that happiness is the result of personal efforts, not others' demands. Sometimes my parents call, sometimes they ask for advice or support, but I no longer react emotionally. I helped them when I could, and now my strength belongs to me and Sophia. And that feeling of independence and peace is priceless. If someone is reading this and thinks that sacrifices for family always pay off, know that sometimes they don't in the usual sense. Sometimes they bring an inner lesson that transforms your whole life, and that's the most important thing. Today, I live for real. My life is the result of my choices, my labors, and my care for myself and Sophia. I realized that being a good son doesn't mean being a victim. Being a good son means being a person who respects himself, creates his own life, and loves those who truly deserve it. And that, perhaps, is the greatest discovery of all these years.